I got home at 2:30 a.m. from a night shift and found my fiancé asleep, with 2 glasses of wine on the nightstand. When I opened the bathroom door, he was still in the shower. I pulled into the parking lot a little after 2:30 in the morning, bone-tired and ready to collapse. My shift at the hangar had been extended by 4 hours after a hydraulic leak grounded a jet set to leave at sunrise. The usual rhythm of my nights was predictable: finish work, drive home, shower, maybe grab something from the fridge, then sleep until late morning. Tonight, I was running on fumes. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out of my truck wasn't the cold or the quiet, but the faint, sharp smell of cigar smoke drifting in the air. Not the cheap kind that clings to your clothes after someone smokes on a street corner. This was the thick, sweet type that leaves a lingering oiliness in your nose. I had never smoked a day in my life, and I couldn't remember the last time anyone I knew had been around with a cigar. It was enough to make me pause before unlocking the apartment door. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. The hallway light was off, and the living room was still except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The air felt warmer than usual, like the heat had been running higher than the setting I always left it at. My boots were still wet from the hangar floor, but I tried to keep quiet walking across the hardwood. I glanced into the bedroom. Meera was there, curled on her side, face turned toward the wall. The blankets were pulled up to her shoulder, hair splayed across the pillow like she'd been asleep for hours. I would have believed it too, if not for the 2 wine glasses sitting on the nightstand. One was half full, the other empty, both with beads of condensation clinging to the sides. I didn't drink wine, not even casually, and Meera was the kind of person who opened a bottle once every 3 months for a holiday. I stood in the doorway for maybe 5 seconds, letting the details settle into place. 2 glasses, not rinsed, close enough together that someone had been sitting on her side of the bed. I didn't see a bottle anywhere in the room. Then, beneath the faint whir of the heating system, I heard it, the muted hiss of running water. The bathroom door was closed, and the exhaust fan was on. At that point, there were 2 ways I could have reacted: walk in and start demanding answers, or keep my head cold. My job has trained me to notice small things under pressure, and I knew from experience that walking into a situation half-blind only gives the other person a chance to cover their tracks. So I stood still for a moment, breathing slow, before crossing the bedroom. The floor outside the bathroom door was damp. I tried the handle, it wasn't locked. The door swung open on the soft creak of the hinges, and the smell of expensive cologne rolled out into the cooler air of the bedroom. Steam fogged the mirror over the sink, and the shower curtain was drawn halfway closed. Through the gap, I saw him. A man in his mid-30s, maybe, with dark hair slicked back from the water and a lean build. He looked right at me, not startled, calm, like he had been expecting me. For a long beat, neither of us said a word. He didn't ask who I was, didn't reach for a towel, just tilted his head slightly and stepped back under the spray. I didn't ask anything. I closed the door and stepped back into the bedroom. Meera didn't move. Her breathing was even, but I couldn't tell if it was the rhythm of real sleep or the act of someone trying to appear unconscious. I went into the living room. The jacket draped over the back of the armchair wasn't hers, dark wool, tailored, with a faint smell of the same cologne I'd caught in the bathroom. The pockets were heavy, and my fingers found a set of car keys I didn't recognize, a folded receipt from a downtown wine bar time-stamped 3 hours earlier, and a single plastic keycard with the embossed logo of a self-storage company on the edge. I set everything back exactly as I'd found it, taking a mental photograph of the details: the smudge of moisture on the receipt, the shallow scratch along the keycard's magnetic strip, the unfamiliar brand of the key fob. I slipped into the kitchen and pulled my phone from my pocket. The apartment was still quiet except for the steady stream of water behind the bathroom door. I opened the fridge, not for food, but because its dull white light gave me a way to scan the counters without switching on the overheads. The corkscrew was out, lying next to a clean wine opener Meera never used. The bottle was gone. There was one thing I wanted to check before leaving the kitchen. I crouched by the cabinet under the sink where we kept the cleaning supplies and found a small trash bag tied off and wedged behind the bin. Inside were 2 empty wine bottles, both from a vineyard far outside our usual budget. One had a cork jammed in halfway, stained deep red along one side. I photographed them quickly and put the bag back exactly as it was. By the time I turned toward the bedroom again, the shower had stopped. The fan still hummed. I didn't wait for the man to step out. Instead, I slipped into my work boots, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the cold hallway. Down in the parking lot, I scanned the row of cars until I found one that matched the style of the jacket: sleek, imported, with a fresh coat of wax that reflected the overhead light. The plates weren't from our state. I leaned casually against my truck, phone in hand, pretending to scroll while I zoomed in and snapped a clear shot of the license. The building's front door opened behind me, but I didn't turn. I caught the reflection of movement in the glass of a parked SUV, a tall figure stepping out into the lot, moving toward the car I'd just photographed. He didn't glance my way. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner before I went back upstairs. Meera was still in bed, still on her side, still breathing in that steady rhythm. She didn't move when I pulled a blanket from the closet and lay down on the couch. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept seeing the keycard in my mind. Its sharp edges, the embossed logo, the faint scratch that looked like it had been swiped through a reader many times. I had passed that storage facility on the freeway before. It was 15 minutes from our apartment, sitting low between two strip malls, unremarkable except for its bright orange signage. I didn't need to wake Meera to know the truth. This wasn't a one-off, and it wasn't going to stop. But if I played it right, I could figure out exactly what she was involved in, and why the man in my shower had been so calm, like my presence in my own home was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. The radiator clanked once, then fell silent. The apartment cooled slightly. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed and then cut off. I stared at the dark ceiling until my phone's alarm buzzed for my next shift. When I got up, Meera was gone. Her side of the bed was made, the glasses cleared from the nightstand. In the kitchen, the trash bin had been emptied, the corkscrew put away, and the damp towel from the bathroom was draped over the shower rod. The jacket in the armchair was gone too. But she had missed something, a faint ring left by the base of the wine glass on the nightstand. I poured coffee into a travel mug, slid the photo of the keycard to the top of my phone's gallery, and locked the door behind me. Whatever was in that storage unit, I was going to find out. By the time my shift ended the next evening, the photograph of that keycard had been burned into my head like a blueprint I couldn't unsee. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at work. I wasn't ready to invite opinions or advice, especially not the kind that involved confrontation before I had the full picture. Instead of going straight home, I drove past the storage facility. It sat behind a row of discount furniture stores and an auto parts chain, its orange and white branding visible from half a mile away. The place was quiet, one other car in the lot, lights glowing from the front office. The rest of the units stood in neat, windowless rows behind a keypad-secured gate. I parked across the street in the shadows of a closed diner, watching for 15 minutes. A security guard made a slow patrol on a golf cart, looping between the rows. The main gate clicked open twice, once for a van that rolled in and out quickly, once for a man carrying a single box to his unit. I'd been working with heavy equipment for over a decade. Locks, panels, hidden access points, they all follow patterns. This place was no different. The next morning, I returned during business hours, posing as someone interested in renting a unit. The manager, a middle-aged guy in a polo shirt, gave me the standard sales pitch: month-to-month leases, climate-controlled units, insurance options. I asked if I could see one of the mid-sized spaces. As he walked me down the row, I memorized the numbering system, the gate's beep sequence, the timing of the latch release. Back at my truck, I pulled the keycard photo up again. The number stamped on the corner, 1184, matched the row I'd just walked past. The card itself was still in the jacket I'd seen draped over the armchair. I hadn't taken it yet. That meant I needed another opportunity to get inside without Meera noticing. That opportunity came 2 days later. She texted me in the afternoon saying she was meeting a friend for dinner across town. I played along, told her I'd be working late, and kept my truck parked a few blocks away until her car pulled out of the lot. Inside, the jacket was back in the same place. I slid the keycard into my pocket, locked up, and drove straight to the facility. The gate recognized the card without hesitation, the keypad emitting the same double beep I'd memorized. Unit 1184 was near the back, away from the security cameras mounted at the corners. The lock was a heavy-duty cylinder type, but years of dealing with aircraft maintenance had given me enough skill to bypass it with a pick set I kept in my glove compartment. The roll-up door groaned softly as it rose. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and leather. Stacks of uniform boxes lined one wall, unlabeled, but sealed with industrial tape. Against the far wall stood a tall, steel cabinet with a combination dial. To the side, there were 2 garment racks shrouded in black fabric covers. I started with the boxes. The first 3 I opened were filled with designer handbags still in dust covers, shoes in tissue paper, and jewelry boxes from high-end boutiques. None of it looked worn. The 4th box was heavier. Inside were small electronics, tablets, smartphones, cameras, most still in shrink wrap. My hands were steady, but my breathing was sharp in my ears. This wasn't an affair where the worst betrayal was in the bedroom. Meera and whoever that man was were sitting on thousands, maybe tens of thousands, in merchandise. I turned to the cabinet. The lock was solid, but I'd come prepared. A small inspection mirror on a telescoping rod, let me see the numbers as I turned the dial, watching for the telltale give of the tumblers. 10 minutes later, the door swung open. The shelves inside were stacked with thin, legal-sized envelopes. Each was labeled with a name and an address, most from neighborhoods I knew were expensive. Inside the first envelope was a property deed, stamped and notarized, but the signatures didn't match the printed names. The second contained a similar document, along with a photocopy of an ID card that looked crudely altered. By the fourth envelope, the pattern was obvious. Property transfers that didn't seem legitimate, all linked by the same notary stamp. Whoever had arranged these had been careful, but not careful enough to hide that they were working multiple fraudulent transactions at once. Tucked into the back of the cabinet was a small cash box. I popped it open, bundles of bills in neat bands, at least 20,000 by quick count. Alongside it was a ledger, handwritten in small, neat script. Dates, initials, amounts, and cryptic notes. D drop-off. Final P, Stage 2. I set everything back exactly as I'd found it, but before I closed the cabinet, I planted something small. In my toolbox was a GPS tracker no bigger than a matchbox, with a 3-month battery life. I pressed it against the underside of the middle shelf, where it would be invisible unless you were looking for it. By the time I locked the unit again, my mind had already leapt to the next step. Evidence was good, but evidence tied to movement was better. If I could see where these boxes were going, I could map the network. I drove the keycard back to the apartment and returned it to the jacket pocket before Meera got home. She walked in less than an hour later, casual, relaxed, carrying takeout. She asked about my shift, complained about the traffic. I nodded in the right places, keeping my tone even. That night, while she was in the shower, I checked the Trackers app on my phone. The dot was stationary at the storage facility. The following morning, it was gone. The signal pinged from an address across town, a short-term rental property in a part of the city that thrived on cash transactions and anonymity. I knew the street well. I'd done some side work there years back, fixing hangar doors for a private pilot who rented in that area. I parked a block away, close enough to watch the front entrance. The building was nondescript, 2 floors, metal staircase, peeling paint. At 10 past noon, a black SUV pulled up. Meera stepped out of the passenger side. The man from my bathroom followed, carrying a long, narrow box like the kind used for artwork or instruments. They went inside and didn't come out for 2 hours. When they did, they weren't carrying the box. Instead, Meera was holding a slim leather folder, and he had a plastic bag that sagged heavily at the bottom. I took photographs from behind the windshield of my truck, time-stamped, geotagged. I tailed them as far as the freeway, where they split off, her toward our apartment, him toward the business district. That night, the tracker showed the box moving again, this time to a high-rise condo downtown. The name on the building was one I recognized from the property deeds I'd seen earlier. It was becoming clear this wasn't a side hustle or a casual scheme. This was structured, layered, and big enough to risk years in prison if caught. And for some reason, Meera had chosen to keep me close while running it. Maybe I was part of the cover, stable fiancé, steady job, no reason to suspect she was involved in anything shady. Or maybe she thought I was too distracted by work to notice the nights she slipped out. What she didn't know was that once I had a trail, I never let it go cold. By the third day, I had photos of 3 separate meetings in 3 different locations, each involving the transfer of sealed boxes and the same rotation of 4 or 5 people. Meera was always there, always paired with the man from my shower. And every time I looked at them through the telephoto lens, I thought about how calm he had been standing there in my bathroom. How sure he must have been that nothing would happen. I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. If I went to the police now, I could hand them stolen goods, fake deeds, and suspicious meetings. But I couldn't connect it all into a single, irrefutable chain. Not yet. For that, I needed more than photos. I needed a moment where all the pieces were in the same place, visible to anyone who cared to look. I didn't know when that opportunity would come, but I knew where it would start, inside that storage unit, with whatever they planned to move next. The tracker stayed still for almost a week, pulsing quietly from the same spot in the storage unit. Then, late on a Wednesday night, it moved again. The dot slid across the map toward the same short-term rental I'd seen before. But this time, it didn't stop there. 40 minutes later, it pinged from a high-end event venue on the waterfront, a place with glass walls, polished stone floors, and a parking lot full of cars with temporary plates and dealership frames. That location told me something important. They weren't just moving goods. They were moving them into spaces where deals could be disguised as legitimate events. I didn't have a badge or the authority to make arrests. What I did have was the name and number of someone who could make my evidence matter. Her name was Nadia. We'd gone to high school together before losing touch. I ran into her 2 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue and found out she was a licensed private investigator. We'd swapped numbers and never spoken again until that night. I sent her a single line. Need help with something that's going to sound insane, but it's real. She called within 3 minutes. I didn't dump the whole story, just the broad strokes. Possible fraud ring, stolen goods, property scams, my fiancé involved. She listened without interrupting, then said to meet her the next morning at a diner on the edge of town. Nadia wasn't the type to waste words. Over coffee, I showed her the photos, the deed copies, the meeting shots, and the tracker history. Her expression didn't change until she saw the property documents. Then she leaned back, tapping her fingernail on the edge of the folder. This, she said, is how organized flips hide behind real estate fronts. It's big enough that if you give it straight to the cops without context, it'll get buried in some property crimes pile. You want it to stick? You need a full hand before you play your cards. Her proposal was simple but risky. We'd map the entire operation, identify every player, and catch them transferring both stolen goods and fraudulent paperwork at the same time. The more simultaneous evidence, the harder it would be for anyone to claim ignorance. Over the next week, we trailed Meera and the man, whose name Nadia dug up as Paul Renault, through 4 separate meetings. 2 were at the rental property, 1 in a downtown coffee shop, and 1 at a warehouse near the freight terminal. At each location, boxes went in, other packages came out, and money changed hands. Nadia handled the heavy camera work and discreet tailing, using gear I didn't have. My job was to keep tabs on the tracker and spot the moments when Meera's and Paul's routines broke pattern. That break came sooner than I expected. On a Saturday morning, the tracker moved not to the rental, but to an upscale hotel. Nadia and I were in position within 20 minutes, watching from a bench across the street. Paul arrived separately, carrying a slim briefcase. Meera pulled up 5 minutes later in her own car, wearing a tailored jacket I'd never seen before. They disappeared inside, staying for an hour before emerging with 2 other men I hadn't seen in any of our surveillance yet. One shook Paul's hand. The other handed Meera an envelope thick enough to bow slightly under its own weight. Nadia caught the whole thing on video from the reflection of a storefront window. Back at her office, we compared the new footage to our earlier shots. One of the unfamiliar men was listed as a director for a shell company tied to 2 of the fraudulent property deeds in the cabinet. The other had been indicted for wire fraud 7 years ago, though the charges were dropped. We had enough to go to the police, but Nadia was right. We didn't have the full hand. If we moved too soon, they could claim the goods were unrelated to the deeds, that meetings were innocent. So we planned the trap. The next major movement on the tracker came 3 days later, 2 separate pings within minutes of each other. One box left the storage unit in Paul's SUV, another left in Meera's sedan. Both headed in the same direction, the same waterfront venue from before. It was perfect. Public space, high visibility, lots of guests, and multiple members of the group in one location. Nadia contacted a friend in the department, not a detective, but someone in Vice who could push things to the right desk without tipping off the wrong people. She didn't give my name. We provided an outline. Possible large-scale fencing and deed fraud, ongoing, with a meeting scheduled that could put all the key players in one room. The officer agreed to have a couple of plainclothes observers on site, just to watch. If they saw enough to act, they would. The venue was booked for what looked like a private reception. The guest list was handpicked, and we weren't on it, but Nadia had a workaround. 2 catering uniforms from a company she freelanced for years back. With hats low and trays in hand, we could move through the space without drawing attention. The day of the event, I followed Meera from our apartment. She drove straight to the storage unit, collected a box, and continued to the venue. Paul was already there, unloading 2 garment bags into a side entrance. Inside, the event looked like any corporate networking mixer: wine stations, canapes, small groups of people chatting. But the core of the action was at a cluster of tables near the back, where I saw the familiar rotation. Paul, Meera, the 2 men from the hotel, and 3 new faces. From a vantage near the catering prep area, Nadia filmed every handoff. Garment bags were unzipped to reveal framed art. Boxes were opened to show electronics. Envelopes slid under the table. Meera leaned in to show someone a folder that I recognized instantly from the storage cabinet. I moved slowly through the crowd, refilling glasses, catching fragments of conversation. Words like closing date, transfer, and wired by Friday floated above the background noise. Then came the moment we hadn't planned for. One of the new men, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, stepped away from the group and into a side hallway. Meera followed. Nadia, sensing something, handed her tray to another server and slipped after them. 10 minutes later, she was back, eyes sharp. They're counting cash in the hallway. The plainclothes guy saw it too. We're close. I glanced toward the entrance. 2 men in suits who'd been mingling separately were now talking quietly near the coat check. One reached for a phone. Back at the main table, Paul was packing the art back into its bag. Meera slid the folder into her tote and zipped it. The room's energy shifted. People started to drift toward the exits. Nadia whispered, "If they leave without taking that box, we lose the strongest connection." I didn't have time to think. I moved toward the table, tripping as I passed, letting the tray clatter to the floor. The noise made Meera flinch, her tote slipping just far enough for the folder to slide halfway out. One of the plainclothes officers was there in an instant, bending to help, but really getting a clear view inside. Whatever he saw was enough. A nod passed between him and his partner, and within 30 seconds, uniformed officers entered through the main doors. The first to be approached was Paul. Another officer intercepted Meera near the coat rack. The rest moved in on the other men, quiet but firm. Guests began murmuring, some edging toward the exit, others pulling out phones. The venue manager's face had gone pale. Nadia and I retreated to the prep area, out of the immediate mess. We didn't need to be part of the arrests. Our job had been to bring the pieces together, and now they were. From behind the half-closed service door, I saw Meera's expression as they guided her toward the entrance. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. It was calculation, her mind already spinning on who had set her up and how to counter it. But the folder in the officer's hand told me she wasn't going to talk her way out this time. When the last of the group was let out, Nadia and I slipped away, ditching the uniforms in her car and driving separate routes back to her office. She was already backing up the footage to 3 drives and encrypting copies before I even sat down. "They'll need a statement eventually," she said. "But not from you directly, not yet. Let this run its course." I nodded, the weight of months of suspicion and quiet work settling into something heavier, the knowledge that this was only part of the story. Paul and Meera had been calm because they'd been running this for a long time. There were others in the chain, and now that the first link had snapped, the rest might start breaking, fast. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of the industrial district, a place where no one would notice or care who came and went. My phone lit up twice before I'd even checked in, Meera's number. I didn't answer. The third time, it was a text. "We need to talk." There was nothing to talk about. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and left it that way until morning. By the time I woke, the news had broken. Not front-page headlines yet, but enough to start the fire. A local business blog had picked up the arrests at the waterfront venue, citing suspected property fraud and fencing operation. No names in the article, but the accompanying photo showed Paul in handcuffs, his head turned just enough for anyone who knew him to recognize him. Behind him, partially obscured, was Meera. The story spread faster than I expected. By midday, 2 of the property addresses from the cabinet had been matched to active complaints in civil court. Victims were speaking to reporters. One woman described being locked out of her own house after a sale she never authorized. Another mentioned the same notary stamp I'd seen in the envelopes. I kept my head down, went to work, and waited. That evening, Nadia called. They're holding her on multiple counts: fraud, possession of stolen property, conspiracy. She's making bail, but it's high. Paul, he's not getting out tonight. Prior record. And from what I hear, the 2 new guys are rolling on each other already. It was a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief that it was no longer my word against hers. Unease because I knew Meera well enough to know she wouldn't sit quietly and take the hit alone. Sure enough, 2 days later, a mutual friend reached out. One of those people who always hates to be in the middle, but somehow ends up there anyway. He said Meera was telling people I'd been part of it, that I'd known about the storage unit and taken a cut. She was planting seeds early, maybe hoping to muddy the water before her preliminary hearing. Nadia had warned me this could happen. She already had a counter ready. Let her talk. We've got timestamps, tracker data, and you in a completely different place for every meet she had. If she tries to drag you in officially, it'll backfire. It did. The week after her release on bail, Meera showed up at the apartment. I knew she'd be coming. Her car had been parked on the street an hour before she knocked. I didn't open the door. Instead, I watched from the window as she tried the handle, then leaned close to the peephole like she could will me to respond. When she left, she didn't go quietly. She shouted something about telling the truth, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I recorded the whole thing and sent it to Nadia, who added it to the evidence packet she was building for the DA's office. The arrest triggered a cascade. The storage unit was seized and inventoried, confirming the merchandise, cash, and documents I'd seen. More units under Paul's name turned up in other facilities, same pattern, different goods. The notary on the deeds was arrested after investigators linked her to multiple forged transfers. By the end of the month, the network was unraveling in real time. Bank accounts were frozen. Shell companies dissolved under court order. Every new document pulled another person into the spotlight. I stayed out of it publicly. My name never appeared in the articles, and I made sure it stayed that way. Nadia handled all communication with law enforcement on my behalf, feeding them the timeline, photos, and video without pointing them back to me unless absolutely necessary. Privately, though, the fallout was everywhere. Friends I'd known for years called to ask if it was true, if Meera had really been living a double life. Some were fishing for gossip, others genuinely shocked. I kept my answers short and factual. Yes, she was arrested. No, I didn't know about it until the night I came home early. Yes, I was done. The landlord called to say Meera had been trying to get into the apartment while I was at work. I changed the locks the same day. One of the most surreal moments came when a man I'd never met showed up at the hangar looking for me. He was in his 60s, wore a battered leather jacket, and introduced himself as the brother of one of the property owners from the forged deeds. He shook my hand and said, "You stopped her from taking my sister's place. Whatever else happened, you've got my thanks." Then he left without another word. The court hearings moved slowly, as they always do, but the picture that emerged was clear. Paul and Meera had been running the operation for at least 2 years, using the stolen property to launder money from the fraudulent sales. The wedding had been part of the cover, a way to present Meera as stable and trustworthy while she handled the paperwork side of the deals. When the DA's office finally offered plea deals, Paul refused. Meera took 10 years reduced to 6 in exchange for cooperation. I didn't care what she said about the others. What mattered was that she wouldn't be walking into my apartment again. I never went to see her in court. The closest I came was sitting in my truck outside the courthouse one morning, watching as deputies escorted her in through the side entrance. She didn't see me. By the time sentencing rolled around, I'd moved to a different apartment across town. I kept my number, but she never called. I heard from Nadia that Meera had tried to send a letter through a friend, but it never reached me. I didn't ask what it said. Paul got 15 years. The notary received 5. The others picked up sentences ranging from probation to 7 years, depending on how much they cooperated. As for the stolen goods, most of them were returned to the victims. Some couldn't be traced and were sold at auction. The proceeds split among restitution funds. Nadia refused to take payment from me for her work, saying the satisfaction of burning the whole network down was enough. I didn't argue, but I sent her a gift card to her favorite gear shop with no return address. Looking back, the most unsettling part wasn't the night I found Paul in my shower, or the moment I opened that steel cabinet in the storage unit. It was the realization that if my shift schedule hadn't changed, I might have married Meera without ever knowing. I might have been the perfect cover for another decade of fraud. Now, the apartment is quiet when I come home from work. No cigar smoke, no wine glasses, no hum of a shower that shouldn't be running. Just my own space, my own locks, my own life. The only reminder is a small metal key card I keep in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every time I see it, I remember that calm look on Paul's face in my bathroom, and how wrong he was to think I'd do nothing. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.